Welcome back to the Burning Branches podcast.
This is something special.
Walking down a marketplace street, the noonday sun beating on you, the smell of animals and sweat assault your nostrils. The sound of commerce and trade all around you, clinking of coins, barking of dogs, the haggling of merchants. A squeaking noise breaks out over the din. You can hear it clearly.
Why does that sound familiar?
Looking up, you find yourself in front of an open door. Peering in, you see the source of that sound. A wheel, turning. A lump of some sort of mud sitting on top of it.
What could this be?
Stepping into the shop to get a better look, notice a man stooped over his mud, his hands working deftly at it, dribbling water, here a little, there a little, as the shape begins to take life and almost grow. A shape forming.
A plate? A bowl? No, maybe a vase.
As the sides grow, one of the lips begins to fold in on itself, and the man deftly sticks his finger in a bit of the mud and slides it across the side, strengthening it, adding stability.
I knew that imperfection was there all along.
A twinkle in his eye, looking down at his work. As the man wipes his hand on his apron, stepping back from his work, you notice behind him, against the wall, a pile of shards.
What could this have been?
Dishonorable work?
And as the man steps up to greet you into his shop, you look behind him, and what was once a pile of mud, a beautiful jug, fit for a king.
What could the value of that be?
If only you knew.
The mystery of the potter working the clay, an ancient thing, a way that God displays his majesty in our lives as his hands work at the clay that is the substance of what we're made of. He remarks that he made this out of dust. He formed us out of that dust. He breathed life into it. And as the potter works at the clay, God shapes our lives, and what was once unrecognizable, made out of the most base substance of the earth, the kind of thing that if you get it on your boot, you wipe it off before you enter the house, can be made into something so beautiful to adorn a palace. One of the deepest mysteries.
It's intriguing because I believe about a week ago, I'm sitting in my secret place, I'm in prayer, and I'm meditating on the Word of God. But then the thought, and I wouldn't say it was the first thought, but the thought that came to my mind was a potter and a clay. And with Oblivion, I truly didn't pay much attention to it. But the morning after, I go into my Word and I type into my Bible app potter and a clay, and the first story that comes to mind is Jeremiah being told by God to go to the potter's house, and God is going to tell him what he wants him to hear at the potter's house. And it's crazy because God tells Jeremiah that, hey, I want you to go to the potter's house, but once you get to the potter's house, I'm going to tell you to hear me. I'm like, I'm already hearing you. I'm like, is there a difference? Is there a difference in revelation? The thought that comes to my mind is what is it called? An immediate inspiration. There's an immediate inspiration based on that surrounding. But before God told Jeremiah to go to that potter's house, there was not an immediate inspiration. So he tells him to go to a position or put himself in a place where he can find immediate inspiration. And it's like, well, when you get there, with how the environment is set up, I'm going to cause some inspiration, and I'll speak through that inspiration to you. And I think it's just it's a crazy story to really think about, because if you consider clay, and I was really looking into it, there are three forms of clay that a potter uses, and earthenware is a form of clay that the easiest clay for the potter to work with. And it's crazy how in the Bible God refers to us as the earthen vessel. It's like, so just knowing that, like, God knows that we're so easy. I wouldn't say so easy, but he picks a potter because the easiest clay for the potter to use is the earthen vessel. And even that in itself is a whole revelation, or is a whole understanding as to what we are as humans and how God can work with us the way he wants to work with us.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting when you consider that earthen vessel. It's like made out of the most. It's it's mud.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, who would make something out of mud? And it kind of makes me reflect on my own life. It's like I think about the times that I was mud. I was dirt. I was nothing, and I was despicable. And yet somehow God was like, yeah, I can make something out of this. It's like the eye of the master crafter as he looks upon the potential materials to make something out of. A true master knows I can see potential in this.
That's right.
Hashtag upcycling.
No, even as I took the time to reflect on this this experience in my secret place, I come to think about it. Like, why is there clay and there is lamb? Is there a correlation between clay and lamb? Because like as a lamb, like a shepherd and a lamb, right? Mm-hmm. And I know like lambs are helpless. They are helpless. They're not the most wise. They're basically under the submission of how smart their shepherd is. The same way a clay is. A clay is at the mercy of the wisdom and the vast imagination of the potter. It's like, I'm like, why is it that God uses the most shapeable items to depict us as men? And I was contemplating about that. I'm like, why is that the case? Because we have to be in the position where the wisdom of God supersedes our wisdom. We have to be in the position where the imagery of God supersedes our imagery, or the adequacy of God supersedes our inadequacies in a sense. And I've been thinking about that. I'm like, man, I think there's a correlation between clay and lamb because of how moldable each one of them are, or how each one of them are at the mercy of their shepherd or their potter.
It's interesting when you consider like the moldability of something, the ability to take something and then to turn it into something else completely. This is something that I like to think of it as like the creative spark. I remember many years ago I was up late and I was meditating on this concept of like no animal can invent a process with which to dismantle something and build something brand new from an idea. Right. And like there are animals that can make things.
Right.
A beaver can make a dam, right? He can cut down a tree and he can dam up the river and he can make his nest in that dam. A bird can make their nest. Then there are many animals make many things, dig burrows, build hills and tunnels, but they always make the same thing. If you find one, you find it somewhere else, they're going to make the exact same thing, or the exact same process, right? But people, we have the creative spark where we can look at a tree and have the idea of a chair. And say, all right, I can chop that tree down, cut it into pieces, and reassemble that tree in the shape of a chair. And boom, I've got a chair. Yeah. We can look at a lump of mud and say, that mud would be great if it could hold my water for me. Boom, you've got a cup. Mm-hmm. We can invent this process. We can take something, take it apart to its base components and rebuild it into a multitude of many things. Mm-hmm. Right? And I think this is one of the great signs that we are truly children of a creator. Right? We're not just any other creation. There's the creative spirit and spark that God has put inside of man and as a gift, and saying, I want you to be like me. I want you to be able to create things. I want you to be able to imagine and have vision and execute to change the world around you. And it's that vision. And it's something that it's hard to quantify. It's hard to measure, but you recognize it when you see it, Think about all of these wonderful artists that have come in all of history, right? Picasso and what are some other artists? As he forgets every artist that has ever been. But people with these visions that have executed, you look at the Mona Lisa, or you look at some of these paintings, and you're like, wow, the ability to translate a vision into their creation, and the whole world's marveling at it, like, wow, like never have we seen this before. And the spark that God has put in man, the spark that God himself, as he looked on the dust, I imagine, like, I can't even imagine what's going through God's mind when he picks up a lump of dust and he's like, I would like to make something in my image. I would like to make something that looks like me. I want to make something that acts like me. And he breathes life into it. And then, of course, man fell, and now we've subjected to a much more difficult process. And, there's thorns and thistles and all these things that, come around us in life, and God's like, yeah, I knew that would happen, but this is a part of the process. This is the molding and the shaping and the purifying. It's interesting to meditate on that, because it's like, wow, there truly is something at work to create something where there was nothing.
To understand the pottery, we have to understand who the potter really is, right? Like we have to understand that whatever is in the mind of the potter is what he creates with the clay, like you alluded to, David. But sometimes we have no clue what the potter has in mind. And as people that always wants to be in the loop of things, as people that always wants to at least have an idea what our direction of life is, when am I going to get this job, when am I going to get married, when am I going to take this vacation, we want a clear path. We want like a clear, this is where the clear checkpoints to see where we're at in life. But that's only that's only true if we're submitted to the wisdom of the potter here. And you did talk about the creativity aspect that shows us it shows us as an indices of God being the one that creates us. It always intrigues me the level of imagery that God has blessed us men with. I've heard it said this before. I've heard it said this way: everything is made twice. First in your imagination, and then second physically. And I think that's an attribute that God has gifted us, like you alluded to, David, that no other creature truly has. They can, and I thought about this too. 2 days ago, I'm like, how is it possible that a bird, just with his beak, can form a nest that holds them through a storm, like through a hurricane? The nest is still in the tree and it wouldn't move. I'm like, that's creative. That's a creative spark. And I'm like, how is this even possible? Or even there are some certain flowers that are grown for its color. They're grown for its beauty. The same way there are certain vessels that the potter creates just for a beauty, just for its beauty, just for the aesthetics of a room, just for interior design. And so at the end of the day, every single clay or every single one of us has a creative spark, but that creative spark is only borrowed from that creator. But to understand the creative space of what life is truly all about, it has to be submitted to the person that created life.
It's like the only way to see the clearest picture of life is through the lens of the Creator.
Mm-hmm. I think when you get that ability to take a step back and consider the hand of the one who is authoring things, consider that, and consider the creative spark that's behind everything, the driving force, the
narrative.
The narrative. When you consider the narrative that's being written, it gives you a greater appreciation for the details, And
when you understand the narrative that has already been written and how it applies to your narrative, and those two stories become interlaced, that when your narrative and the narrative of your Creator becomes one, that is when an understanding of life begins.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that God had to, the certain imperfections that God had to take out of my life based on the experiences of life is just learn that I can't do it all by myself, know my limits. Mm-hmm. There's so many times, David, I can't tell you this, where I've thought to myself that I can do it. I don't, and I know that I'm human, but there are moments where I feel superhuman, like I can do all, I felt to me that I had no limits. Mm-hmm. I had no limits. But sometimes God will make you lie down.
Yeah.
He makes me lie down in green pastures. He makes you. It's not a question. It's not about, oh God, but I want to do this. No. And I say this in the sense that I see there are seasons in my life where my energy levels are not as high. And as much as I want to be in the gym for an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever the case is, I want to be reading every single book. There are days where it's like, okay, my body's not feeling it. I just want you to just stay home and just rest. Mm-hmm. I want you to just put your phone on do not disturb and just rest. Maybe he will cause a little bit of fever just so I can stay home and rest. If not, sometimes we need these moments to just lie down, stay still, lie down. Those type of moments. And I think that's one thing that God's been working on me on, just knowing my limits, staying still, and just making me lie down as a potter.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good place to be. I think one thing about understanding the potter as he works the vessel, something that I was considering as I was talking with a dear friend of mine, is sometimes we get so caught up in this crisis of identity, where we begin to see attributes of ourselves, like we're looking at a reflection of ourselves and who we think we are, right? And we get really attached onto it. And this is evident in just kind of the way people approach astrological signs, They say things like, oh, I'm an Aries, so we behave like XXX. I'm a Cancer, well, we do this, this, and this. Or even that kind of extends onto more psychologically based things like the Myers-Briggs type indicator, the 16 personalities questions. It's, oh, well, I'm a ENTP, and ENTPs behave like this, this, and this. That explains my behavior. We think like this. And it's like, there might be a grain of truth somewhere in there that you have identified a piece of yourself, right? It's like you see a reflection of yourself that you are kind of predisposed to look at. And life starts to make sense like that. And you start to get trapped into this understanding of like, well, I'm made like this because I've seen this, this, and this happen. And therefore this, this, and this have this pattern. In other words, like I've done this my whole life, so I'm going to keep doing this because that's just who I am. And we get caught in this like sticky like place of identity where we're like, oh, well, I've just been this the whole time. But it's the same as though the potter was making a shape, and the shape looks like a bowl, right? And it's like we begin to feel like, oh, these are all the characteristics of what a bowl is, so therefore I must be a bowl, right? But then the potter's not done yet, right? And so he keeps molding the bowl, and he begins to build a different shape to it, and you begin to see a handle emerge and all these other things. And you weren't a bowl. That was just the beginning of it. Mm-hmm. The beginning looked like a bowl, but really you were a jug, right? Or a vase or something else, and the bowl was just the beginning. And I think that's a place where a lot of us get trapped, where we see the beginnings of it. We get old enough where our frontal lobe develops, and we start thinking about our lives, reflecting on it, and we're at that beginning stage, and we're like, oh, I'm this, and this, this, and this, because I've been this, this, and this. And God's looking at us like, well, that was what you started as, but I'm not done yet. And I'm going to bring you to a completion. But by the time you're at completion, you're going to see the bowl somewhere in there, but that's just going to be a piece of it. And I think the spiritual aspect of life is where we have no idea what the finished product is going to look like. We have like an inkling of that image. I was like, well, God is building me to be this, or God is building you to, you're going to be this thing. Maybe, some promise or some dream, some vision. But really, God's vision is so big and so grand. It's like, who knows what perfect Kenneth looks like, Who's seen it yet? Mm-hmm. Only God has seen that in the beginning. And I think that's something that, like you said, it's like when you learn to trust who the potter is and his vision, and you're able to kind of sit back and be like, okay, maybe I looked like a bowl, or maybe I looked like this thing. But then by submitting to the process and surrendering to the potter, he's able to make a more perfect shape. And you're like, oh, this was way bigger and way more than anything I ever could have dreamed of.
And the best part about this is it's not just any potter. It's not just any potter that you just met, I don't know, somewhere downtown, somewhere in the Middle East. It's not just any potter. This is the potter that caused the earth into flourishing. This is the potter that tells where the sea needs to stop. This is the potter that tells the sun when to rise and when to set. This is the potter that forms the clouds. It's not just any potter. This is the potter that knows the stars, every single stars, and he knows them by name. This is the potter that knows every single hair strand. This is the potter that made everyone so unique. Their fingerprints are so, like 8 billion people with different fingerprints. So it's not just any potter. This is the potter that has a vast imagery. This is a potter that understands what creativity is. And I think it's just having that inclination, like you said, or having that heart posture puts you in a sense where you learn to relinquish it all. Like, God, you are creative. Like, you're so creative. Like, look at the beauty of the mountains. You know, you're driving through Colorado, or look at how the sun sets over that ocean. The birds are chirping, the hustling of the leaves. Like, look, I think it just blows my mind when I think about how powerful creation is. And thinking of that in a perspective of a potter, We just need to learn to submit to the potter and understand that it's not just any potter. It's not just any potter. This is a potter that created the universe. He did.
Wow.
No, this is a potter, and I think about it so many times, brother David, brother Christian. It's like if the earth was positioned a mile away, it would not be habitable. If the earth was positioned a mile away, it would not be habitable. There would be no photosynthesis, or there would be too much of the sun rays coming in that the ozone layer can encapsulate the number of radiation that's coming in. Everything is just so in precision. With that revelation, I know that I'm in good hands. Like with that revelation, I know that God is going to mold me into what he wants me to mold me into. The goal is like, okay, what is God molding me into? Sometimes is a question that we ask. Well, some of the vases, you just put flowers in there. Some of the vases, you just put it in the corner somewhere just to make the room look good. Some of the vase, you hold oil in it, right? Some of the vase, I don't know, you hold water in it. Some of the vase, you ferment wine in it. So it's more about it's more about understanding what kind of vase or what kind of vessel God wants to mold you into. Sometimes that becomes a question right after that. But I know that understanding that it's not just any potter puts you in a better light of just not stressing or not being anxious about things. And don't get me wrong, it's not a place of inactivity, but it's just a place of revelation as to who the potter really is.
I think that's a profound meditation. I think that's the kind of thing that you see in Psalms over and over again. As David, he meditates on this.
Oh, he's so good at that.
And as he produces these thoughts and pins them down about marveling at the works of God, he says, how many are your thoughts towards me? Right? It's like the God who artistically crafted every detail and every flower, every tree, everything that he gave us dominion over, everything that he handed to us. He created every detail in us. And so how many thoughts, more than the sands in the sea, he says, or the sands on the beach rather, and more than the water in the sea. And to understand like the amount of care that God has over the children that he gave that creative spark to. That's the most important part of his creation to him. It's so important that he sent his only begotten son to die on the cross.
Detail.
The only creation that he did that for. So as he looks in, and David says something else, I think it was in Psalms 138. We were reading this the other day, Christian. It really caught my eye, where he says, I'm going to paraphrase. He says, your presence surrounds me. He's like, the fact that you were with me. If I went down to hell, you'd be with me. If I went to heaven, you'd be with me. He says, such a thought is too wonderful for me, that God is always present. It's understanding that God takes an interest, an extreme amount of interest in the details of our lives as he looks at us and he says, okay, but he hands over control to us. That's because he didn't make something to be, just like you said, it's not just to sit still,
yes, but
he hands over control to us. He says, okay, what are you going to make? What are you going to do? And there's an interest there of like, I heard a preacher say something that for the first time in my life, I realized God didn't make man to not work. Right? He didn't make man and then man fell and all of a sudden he had to work. Man had to work the whole time.
Right.
He made him to tend the garden,
yes, sir,
right? But it was the falling that made the work a difficult process, added the thorns and the thistles and the sweat and all these unpleasant parts of it. But man was always supposed to work. It's just work's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be a good time, at least before the fall, right? And the reason is because God works. He likes to work. He's like, I want to create things. So I want to make you like to create things. Think about like the naming process of the animals. And he's just like, you're going to have authority over these things. I want you to use your creative process to name these things. I want to see what you come up with. And there's like, it's almost like when you're, I think about my nephews, right? And if I give my nephew some Legos, I want to see what he makes with them. I'm like, I wonder what you're going to make with these Legos. I know what I would make, but I want to see what you're going to make. You hand your nephew a drum. You're like, what kind of music are you going to produce? And I think there's that same interest as a father that God has over us. It's like, what are you going to do with it? I gave you my creative spark. What are you going to make?
No. I think that's just you're spot on. You're spot on that, and it's like I said, it's just a lack of revelation as to who the potter is, David. It's just a lack of revelation. Sometimes it's like, why do we just sit and be anxious and be worried and just be desolate and destituted because we have no clue where we're heading in life, right? And we understand that God has given us that creative space, like you tell us that we can take a tree and make it into furniture, like you talk about. Like we can take, I don't know, you can take a business from scratch and build a business to a $1 billion level. That's a creative space. Well, some people might give acknowledgement to God, some might not, but it's just a creative space that God has given us. And like David says, creation sings of your glory, creation sings of your goodness. And we being in a creative space as God basically singing as God's creation singing of his glory, because we're using that creative space that God has given us. But a lot of times though, David, I do want to say that we're not the most moldable people sometimes, you know. It's like, as much as we have an understanding as to who the potter is, it's just the fact that it's hard for the potter to work with us. And in all due respect, like, dude, be moldable. Be moldable. And I think sometimes God makes us moldable. Like, I want to put you in a place where I can mold you, you know. And I think those are not the best places to be.
I remember early in our episodes, you mentioned a few times the idea of Neurop Pathways and how when you live life in a particular manner, regardless of what you do, it's your brain, it's like a rut. And the more you do that thing, the rut gets deeper and deeper and more pronounced. And then it just becomes this thing that you just flow into. And it's the willingness to, metaphorically say, climb out of that rut and to tread a path that's never been tread before, and to do it simply by trusting in God. God telling you that this is the way you should go, even though you've never been this way before. You've never heard of this way before. Sometimes you've never seen anyone take that path before. Or none of the people you're familiar with have. And so you're the only one. And all you have to go on is a voice and a promise. Sometimes that's all that you need.
That's right. No, I think that's so true. The thought that comes to my mind is the shepherd breaking the leg of the lamb. I don't know if I'm saying it right. And the reason for that is the conditioning process. Like, I'm going to make you moldable. If you think you're just going to get up and veer off and go into territories you're not supposed to go into, I'm going to make you moldable in that sense. And I think just not being in a position where you want God to mold you, you don't want the potter to make you moldable.
Oh, so it's like you're gonna get molded one way or the other.
One way or the other. No, and I personally have not seen like the pottery process, but I can imagine a potter with like a lump of clay on the table with a little bit of water, just making that clay moldable before he puts it on the wheel. Does it make sense? So before God even considers conditioning you or molding you, he has to put you in a position where you're malleable. It's something that he can work with in a sense.
Yeah. I think a lot of that comes from, like you had mentioned before, like an outside force acting on it to create a reaction, right?
That's right?
Like there has to be inertia added. And I was
Catalyst.
a catalyst, exactly. I was just reading this book called Fast Forward by Josh Herring, phenomenal book. And I realized something in my life before I picked this book up, and God led me to this book, that I lacked an inertia, right? There were things in my mind, I was like, I need to get these things done, but I lack inertia, right? I need momentum. And Josh Herring describes in this book, he's like, fasting is a way to gain spiritual momentum, right? And I was considering this process of like inflicting, and not to be overdramatic, but inflicting suffering on yourself, right? Inflicting adversity, right? Because adversity gives you a push, right?
A willing taking on of suffering.
Yes, a willing taking on of suffering. And saying, okay, I'm going to be hungry. I'm going to be hungry for a little bit. And recognizing that and being like, okay, so what does Jesus say? He says, pick up your cross and follow me. And growing up, that was always described to me as taking your life to follow him, which is true, but there's a deeper revelation as well, because the cross represents suffering. So Jesus is saying, take your suffering and bear your suffering, follow me, right? Bear your suffering well. Bear your suffering the way I bore my suffering. And so when it's like fasting is like a small microscopic portion of that you're saying, okay, I can handle this for a moment. I can be happy. And that's why Jesus says, be joyful. Don't look like you're suffering. He said, don't tell anybody you're fasting, because you need to be showing joy as if you're not. So it's being able to take that suffering and showing joy during the suffering. And you've taken that on, and it gives you a confidence, and it gives you an inertia. It gives you a push where all of a sudden now you're more moldable. Right? It's like that water that the potter dribbles over the clay to make it moldable. It's like all of a sudden it's a little easier to work with. Why? Because you've just put your flesh, your body into submission. And so I'm not going to let you tell me what to do anymore. My spirit's in charge now.
That's right. That's right. Now, and I'm thinking about the process of which you go from just the what is it? I don't know what the process is when they mold the clay or they knead the clay or whatever, where you go from that to the wheel. 'Cause I think it's just two different stages.
Yeah.
The potter doesn't just grab the clay and throw it on the wheel. I'm not sure what the process is, but I'm thinking I think that's the case there. He doesn't just grab the clay, put it on the wheel, and start working with it. I think he has to mold. I think he has to make it in a way.
Like dough.
Yeah, knead like a dough, and that's what I'm trying to think. And I think that's the process there, like the process where the before the potter takes to the wheel, then there's this fasting that comes in. There's this there's this prayer. There's an introduction to new revelation as to who God is, and now you're moldable. Now I can put you on the wheel and make you into something. And I think that there has to be a clear demarcation between those two, because those are two different stages.
Yeah.
There's one where the clay's on the wheel, and the one before the clay gets on the wheel. And I just had that revelation while you were talking. That's why I had to just jump in and just share that. But
Thank you. That
was
great.
Like there's two stages to it. I'm just now thinking about that.
That's because you always have to prepare the product before you work with it.
That's right.
If you're considering like the refining of metal, right? They take the iron ore out of the mountain, right? But then the iron ore is locked up in all this other stuff, right? So they can't just take the iron ore that they got, the raw, I don't know the term for it, but the raw stuff, and then throw it and make a sword out of it. You can't just do that. You can't just make a pan out of it. Like what you have to do is you have to refine what they call the dross away, right? You have to take all that all the stuff that's not iron out of it, so that you're left with the iron. And then once you take that iron, you melt that down. Now you've got that melted down. Now it's pure. Now you put that into an ingot for later. Then you take that ingot out. Then you have to reheat it back up so that you can work at it. And then you can shape it. So there's always a preparation process. It's just like you're saying, working with anything. That then once it's prepared, now I can actually turn it into the shape of what I need it to be. Like you said, that preparation project is so important. One of my favorite quotes where Abraham Lincoln, somebody asked him, he was a logger. He was interesting life. He was a logger, then he was a lawyer, and then he was a president. I think he was a governor at one point too, right? Governor of Illinois? No, never was. Senator?
No, he lost, and that's what allowed him to run in the presidential race.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm learning. If this podcast did nothing, it taught me that.
Hopefully it does more than that.
So Abraham Lincoln is this very interesting life. And a great example too, because like a civil war is about to break out. He sees it on the horizon. So what does he do? He finds every book of military strategy he can find and starts reading them. It's like, well, if I need to know, he's not even on the ground. He's not a general, but he's like, I still need to know strategy about what I'm about to do. So Abraham Lincoln understood the value of preparation and learning and study, because if I'm about to do something, I want to do it right. So one of my favorite quotes by him is he said, if you give me 6 hours to cut down a forest, I'm going to spend 4 of them sharpening the axe. And that's that preparation phase. It's like somebody I was listening to on this podcast talking about the kairos and the chronos moments. And the kairos moments is that rhythm, that preparation, that, all right, we're gonna go ahead and get into this rhythm. We're going to do all the things we need to do. And then the kairos is like that moment of action, the pinnacle. Like I've been training for this, that Rocky moment, I've been doing my reps. I've been running. Now I'm in the ring with Apollo,
Sir.
It's like that preparation moment. If Rocky didn't jog up and down those steps every day, Apollo would have knocked him flat on the ground. There would have been a Rocky 3 and a Rocky 4. Right? He'd have been down for the count. So that preparation, it can't be understated. The studying or the learning to bear the things in life around you. If you want to accomplish anything, you have to take those on. Because if you don't, when you get in that moment, your axe isn't going to be so sharp, and you're going to quit 3 trees in.
Yeah, no, I think you're very well said, and it's just hard to add anything to that. And I think it's within that preparation stage where you learn to be submissive as well to the potter's hand, because the potter is not going to put anything that's not submissive on the wheel, because how is he going to mold it if you're not going to yield to what he's trying to get you to be into? Because and then like I've heard my pastor say this, like God is a gentle God. He's not going to infringe his right on you. So before he puts you in a position where before he can be in a position where he imparts or imprints his creativity on you, you have to be the one that make the decision to be imprinted on. Does it make sense? If you don't make the decision for the potter to use you as clay, right, then there's no point for the potter to work with you, or the potter possibly will not work with you until you make a decision. Like I said before, you life and death. Choose life, that your seed may have life. And I stand at the door and knock, that anyone may open the door, I'll come in and sup with them. And I think it's just the implication is just like God gives us the opportunity to make these decisions that, hey, God, I'm the clay, you're the potter, work with me as much as you can. Or God, I'm the clay, you're the potter, and impress your creativity on me as much as you can. Put me through the process, like put me through that preparation process as much as you can. Because if you don't, what else am I going to get out of life? I think it's important that we understand that like decisions are so powerful, and through the preparation process, like you're talking about, David, through that process is where submission is found. It's through that process where you understand the sovereignty of God. Like, oh God, I really need you, because if you're not there, what else am I going to do? I think it's a powerful thought.
Absolutely. It's almost like if you look at the way a potter would consider two lumps of clay, and it's like, okay, this one's stiff and this one's not gonna do what I want it to do. But this one's pretty good. I think I can use that one. Seriously. It's like, you want to be that one, right?
100%.
So it's like there's a self-preparation that has to happen, right? And it's kind of interesting when you consider the nature of a vessel, where Jesus says, he's like, why would you put new wine in an old bottle, right? I have to make a new bottle, right? And so there's an aspect and a revelation of Jesus turning you into a new lump of clay so that he can put a new bottle. He can make a new bottle out of you. And that, I think that's the like you say, the heart posture, the mental position you have to take and realize that, like, okay, I need to be made a new creation. Or if you are that new creation, you have to live in the new creation and not keep identifying yourself as the old broken bottle.
100%, 100%. And one of the thought that just came to my mind, David, I think is just so funny that even though we're not potters, well, we're potters in a sense, because we have to wake up every day and make certain decisions. You're creating a sense of your work with whatever clay that's in your hands, if I could say that. And the thought that came to my mind is, even when it comes to us as humans, when you see a girl that you like, you want a girl that you can work with, not a girl that you can't work with.
True.
When you find a girl that's just, she's so rigid in her approach, she's just strong-headed, or you know what I'm saying? She's not moldable. You're like, I don't know, man. I'm just gonna step away. And I think even in our human perspective, sometimes we consider those things, more. It's just a thought that I had. And I thought I had to share it. More, even looking at that same perspective and how God works with things, like this is something I can work with. I'm willing to buy into this person's vision. I'm willing to buy into this man's vision. I'm willing to buy into this girl's vision, or whatever her dreams are. I know women also look at it in the perspective of a man as well, but it's just a thought that I had. I'm like, even in a human perspective, when it comes to choosing a spouse or choosing a job, how flexible are the hours? How flexible are there? Is it possible for me to move up, or is it, or how is the pay increase? Is it every 3 months? Is it every 6 months? You're considering all these things to see how moldable this job is, let alone like when God comes down to work with us, not come down. Well, he came down to die for us, but when God considers working with us as clay, even us as humans, we consider how we're going to work through life, looking at life in that perspective. Is this something I can work with, or is this something that, I don't know. I'm not going to be free on Thursday. I'm not going to be free on Sunday. So I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's, like Bruce Lee said, you got to flow like water. Water is shapeless. Water takes the shape of whatever it's put in. Water flows with the pressure that's behind it. Like there's an aspect where we have to take on that. I'm going to take the shape of whatever I'm put in, the situation. Like I'm not going to be a hard wall. I got to just flow with it, learn to soften the edges, learn to be a little more fluid in the approach, right? And there's a lot of, and he's speaking from like combat experience, and so if it works in combat, then how much more is it going to work in your approach where things aren't trying to kill you?
Yeah.
We thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Burning Branches podcast. Don't forget, leave a like and a comment, subscribe.
Don't forget to follow us on Apple Podcasts, leave a review, because it helps our algorithm.
Find us on YouTube at The Burning Branches, Instagram, Facebook. What's up?
Blessed.